Testing. Testing.
I've already taken it. It's iron. That's what it was. So I went out and shot this piled up pipe. I'm afraid it's gonna rust in there though. I don't know. Is it the last time we used it? Let me tell you what happened to me first. Right before I had both of them. Right before I had the first one, we went to see our kids in Birmingham. So we went to church that Sunday, and the preacher he was up talking, giving announcements. He said, Miss so-and-so died from complications from hip surgery. And I'm saying, afterwards I looked at him and said, he said, oh no, there was other things too. And I said, yeah. I carry with it all the time. What a disappointment. Now look, you can go on back on. You must have got cold. You must have got cold. Are you sure you never had the classes that came apart? I just really remember you doing that one time. I think you might be getting old. Football is first class now. There's a guy on Facebook that said, all right, so December the 18th, we're having Bobby Petrino Welcome Day, so everybody bring your motorcycle stuff. Big discussion with instead of fire, whatever our country is, we'll say that biocon is put in facility. Well, it sounds good. Everybody's thinking, well, this is
All right, Wayne and Ed. Tonight we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 5 and God helping the hurting. And there is also an outline to the book of Nehemiah. Most of you probably have one. I gave out two. One was on perseverance, and one was on the material that we will look at tonight.
Amy said she wants 3 more sheets. She wants to make some airplanes.
Okay?
He's back.
When's your next surgery? And one thing I didn't know is Brother McKinnon is an artist with flowers. Am I right? All right, Wayne, I'll leave these with you if someone else comes in. My Bible says in Hebrews 9:27, it's appointed unto man once to die. So you go ahead and you be planning my spray for the top. Well, I'm only going to have 2 ashes. Go on, say it. My kids never did that. Go on, just say it. Huh?
I thought he sounded happy.
It should be on the material. Is it not at the very top? Chapter 5, I think is what, 1 through 13, the chapter. Marion just walked in. I was up in Little Rock yesterday morning for Colin's surgery, and he had a little trooper. What they did, they can crush a cadaver or a donated bone, and they inject the bone, and the body doesn't reject it. You know, most times if you take something from another body and put it in your body, you have to take an anti-rejection. And so he went through that, and everything was great. Brother Marion came in and said they have taken him to the ER, and the swelling is so bad you wouldn't even recognize him as little Colin. So I said his eye was completely shut. So we really need to have a prayer for little Collins. And I'll ask you, Mark, if you would, to lead that prayer. We've got others. You've got the green sheet out there. Just grab it. And the most immediate need that we have right now is little Collins. And also, Talia White, Steve's daughter. Was it daughter-in-law? Daughter-in-law is up there with little Talia, who had RSV. Today was on 50% of oxygen. They're trying to wean her off today. So it's kind of a scary situation. And my wife said that one of the sure signs of RSV is having snot. You know what that is? I know it's a southern, but if the snot comes out of the nose and bubbles, is the sign of RSV. All right, Brother Mike.
Heavenly Father, we're grateful for the day, for our help. We're able to discuss here tonight, fellowship, study your word. Father, we're mindful of cannot be here because we so cherish the hospital. Father, we know, you already know the condition. Father, it's on our mind, weighing on our heart. That you will heal us, comfortable, and regain strength. And the church will be set, be back to God be with us. Wife, Rick, we pray that she keep going up, that it'll be successful and be able to get her off. Probably just all the people who tonight. We pray.
Amen. The reason I said that about Brother McKinnon, he was taking care of the store while the Whites were up in Little Rock. So, you're always learning something, aren't you? All right, we have the book of Nehemiah chapter 5. Some of the discussion and some of the the topics that's covered by Nehemiah is so foreign to us. But what would you do to provide for your family if they're starving to death? And you find part of it was law, part of it was unlawful. Now we're going to look at that. Just the situation, I mean, they came out, they were brought out of exile only to be sold as slaves. And we'll look at the lawful and we will look at the unlawful side of that when it comes to simply helping. All right, the first question of Nehemiah chapter 5, before we read our text, in God helping, God's help for people that are hurting. The first question, think of someone who reached out to you when you were hurting. Describe that person's support and what it meant to you. All right. And I know when Donna had COVID so bad, yet I can cook. But we told Gina, who at that time was over it, I think, that we really didn't want anyone to bring us anything. Do you think the brethren listened to that?
They do get kind of pushy.
Do I?
They do get kind of pushy sometimes.
And, you know, it was few, but it's all that we needed.
I'll tell you, like I told Julie, you say you don't need nothing. You're keeping somebody doing good. You refuse them.
All right, when you tell people, see, I don't understand why we don't ask people to pray for more situations in our life that embarrass us. We're told to pray for one another. And so when you tell someone no, you're maybe stopping a good work that they could be doing.
I've been thinking about it. I see a lot of people say, unknown request for prayer.
I think sometimes what we do is we say that because we don't want to share the situation with people.
But we know we need help.
Yeah, but let me ask you, and this is going to the point of a time in your life when you were hurting. And who stepped in? And most of the time, there are a few that are very sensitive that step into it and what it meant to you. And part of it may be that in times past, that person may have been hurt by members of the body when they were open about it. And I honestly believe, and I think it's part of the passion of the flesh, that we don't like to share our failures with our brethren.
You know, Mike, I think there's workplace. It's easy to ask for prayers, because by doing that, you know, you control how much you go into what the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
But also when you say, I need help more than that, I think sometimes with some people there's a little bit of a pride thing. I've seen it all across congregations too. And I think a lot of times it can be with men, especially with men. Yeah, I really need help.
Mm-hmm.
It's like men have an answer. I can do this, or I can handle this. And it's like we're less tough or weak.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's part of the passion of the flesh, where our flesh becomes our God. We become our own God. And somehow we've got to fix it, not God.
I was raised up to do that.
Do what?
I was raised up to solve all problems.
Okay.
So it is hard.
Yes, it is hard.
That's sort of the American way too. Individual pride, I take care of this, you know. That used to be the frontiersman attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so there are times that, and it's not sweeping things under the rug, it's this happens and then this happens and it becomes overwhelming. Many times there are situations where I'll just look you in the face and I'm praying that God's will. I don't tell them, I wish you'd do this, I wish you'd do that, I believe you could do this. I'm asking for God's will in your life. And many times, just I'm praying. But I do believe that when we are in a situation that it knocks us down, that we have got to have someone to talk to. And I know that we've got God. Don't misunderstand. God has got to come first. Have you ever been in a situation where you were knocked down so bad? Okay, Juan. Glad to have Juan back.
I do believe that the church was born to perfection to the sea.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, our pastor used to be just like angry people. He'd say, sometimes we have been here.
Mm-hmm.
So people was actually afraid to come and open their heart and ask for prayer. Because he actually was building a church with a Superman attitude.
Yep.
So his standard was so high that we feel like he probably won't even dare to pray for it.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to praying, there has to be that open communication. And I believe that's the number one thing to open up.
Okay.
To open up and ask for pray for me. Please pray for me. When I lost my wife,
Mhm.
And maybe we develop spiritual growth and spiritual strength.
It's like you said, when we have this Superman mentality, you become unapproachable. And I don't know why it is that members of the church somehow think that preachers and ministers are superhuman somehow. When I was down in Florida, I accepted a work on faith. That time the congregation was 52. 11 of them were members that broke away from another church. They said it was friendly, but you go back and you read the business meetings and it was not friendly. And so the original 11 were the bosses of the church, them and their wives. My wife was hurt deeply by two of those women, and my wife has guarded herself ever since. What they did has affected her life. And so when we got to about 170, they didn't like it. And in business meetings, because we couldn't get elders, you would hear statements like, "You haven't been here long enough to say anything." And if you weren't from Florida, you were an outsider. And yet so many were those that had moved down there. Everyone moves to Florida when they get past their teen years. And brethren, everything that I did was wrong. Everything that those 11 didn't like was wrong. And brethren, it got to the point where I really could not care less if I ever got in a pulpit again. I was bound and determined my brethren were not going to hurt me like that again. It was a terrible time. But it wasn't the right thing. I knew that was not the right thing to do. And that's what I had to wrestle with. And so we had an elder from Michigan, Brother Tony McKee. And he would come and he would winter down in Florida. And I would ask him, "How do you winter down here when you're an elder up there?" And every single day he was calling members. He would talk with the elders, find out what was going. He just eldered for a few months from a distance. He is one of the few. Not my local brethren, but an elder from Michigan who said, "Mike, I want you to come eat lunch with me." And so I went over to Crystal River, and Tony looked at me, and Tony was so intimate with the congregation there anyway, he said, "How you doing?" And before I even opened my mouth, he said, "You're not going to lie to me." He said, "I know what you're going through, and I know that you're hurting." And brethren, that happens in every church to some members. And if it wasn't for Tony McKee there to help, to shepherd my soul, I don't know what or where I would be today. Between him and two mentors, John Payne, who was Donna's uncle, and Jim Woodruff from Searcy, Arkansas. These men were a generation ahead of me. And they gave me some of the best advice. Not only that, they allowed me to see their lives in Christ. And it put me back on track.
I think we allow modern life to change things too. We don't take time for fellowship with the brethren in the church as much as we do.
Okay?
Something else going on. It's really hard to keep closeness there where you can feel comfortable talking to somebody. You're not around them a lot.
All right. And, you got people that think this congregation of, say, 200 is a large congregation. Man, there's congregations of 1,700, 600. How do you maintain that intimacy? And so let's look at God. And by the way, in verse 10, Nehemiah admits and claims his part of the problem. It's not a we-you situation. It's we as a congregation of the Jewish people. And so the situation of Nehemiah, and if you need an outline, get one back there. If you should have one, I'll leave them out there, and we'll do the same thing for the book of Esther. But they had come out of exile. They had been in captivity. Nehemiah is called and the people to go back and build the breaches of the wall. And my challenge to you is, what are you doing? What are you doing to help the breaking of the wall, the broken wall? And then I told you, I was reading in the Christian Chronicle, there's been several articles lately of a preacher. They were traveling, they stopped at the church, and no one shook their hand. That doesn't bother me, brethren. What should we be doing? What should I be doing? And I know what we think. Man, it's sure not like Farmington. You can't get away down there. But if they're my brethren, what's wrong with me exerting myself to get to know them? I know it shouldn't be that way, but why do we come in and we sit at the back, no one's friendly, and we leave? What? Do I not have an obligation this somewhere? I think so. And I think it's vitally important, and I'm going to be preaching on this involvement. It's vitally important that you look outside your little group and you see who's here that are visitors and leave the group. And go and visit them. All right? And the, yep.
Sometimes it's a little more obvious in small congregations. It's called cliques. Everybody has their circle of friends. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 of them, but it's 3 to 9. And you get visitors come in, and sometimes they come in and walk out.
And some people like it that way. Some people don't like a congregation like this that try to shepherd the soul. They want to walk in, they want to worship, and they want to leave. They want no involvement. And so sometimes you've got to sit at the back, Mary Sue, just to catch them before they leave. Or you'll see them, and then where'd they go? And like I say, there are other times that you have to wait because people are conscious of visitors. And you try. And many times we assume too much about folks that visit.
Let's just lock the door.
They have been since COVID and since these church shootings. I went to a church in England. I couldn't find the Church of Christ, too far away, and I got on a double-decker bus and went all over Liverpool and couldn't find it. And at that time, I just thought I was going to hell if I didn't take the Lord's Supper on Sunday. And so I just stopped at a Welsh church. And the door was locked, and I knocked, and he came, unlocked it, and he said, "You know, this is a Welsh church." And I thought, well, I know nothing about the Welsh denomination. But I wanted the Lord's Supper. It had on the outside, Lord's Supper served every Sunday. Didn't understand a word they said, but I got to take the Lord's Supper and didn't go to hell. I've got another friend who sailed to New Zealand, and sailing to New Zealand, you miss a day. And so they went Friday, Saturday, Monday when they crossed the timeline. And Brother Dan said, well, what do you think we ought to do? And they said, to us, it's our Sunday, we're going to take Lord's Supper, and they did. But sometimes we do that. Anyone else have any comments?
All I was going to say is sometimes, to be fair to the visitors, you don't know what's going on in their life, and they may have to rush off.
Absolutely.
And I've seen that happen. You got to engage and you got to run.
And you've got good, godly Christians, and you know them because for 10 years they've been visiting with us, but they come before a ball game with their kids, they want to go to church. But when they're through, they've got to be gone. And what sort of judgments do we draw on that? Usually the wrong ones. All right, let's look at Nehemiah. And this is a good lesson. We're going to be on this 2 weeks. That God's children came out of exile. They were in captivity. The king, Artaxerxes, sees Nehemiah's face, and it was not pretty. He had a long face. When they asked what was wrong, he said that the place of God has a wall that's not built. And God was involved in politics. And he made sure that Artaxerxes was there, that Cyrus was there, and others. And Artaxerxes blessed Nehemiah with anything that was needed, an army to help protect, the wood, the rocks. He did what he could to help. And so here's what the Israelites are saying, that during this time, while we're working on the wall, we could not harvest the crops. We lost our homes to the lender. We lost our children to the lender. The governor has put high taxes on our crops that we cannot enjoy, we cannot gather, and we can't pay the tax, so we are selling our children into temporary slavery. And then lo and behold, if it wasn't their enemies, it was the influential Jews taking advantage of a Jew. Oh man, we had one family that really went through a difficult time at Lynn. And they had like a 72 or 73 Corvette sitting out there in the garage. And I was waiting for it. But me and one of the leaders of the church went to help. And I've never seen a member of the church crook another member over a riding lawnmower, knowing that they needed every dime. As a child of God, he should have paid them double. But I've seen brethren do brethren that way. And so the Jews were in a pitiful situation as we begin reading in verse 1 of chapter 5. Now there arose a great outcry. Great doesn't mean they were loud. It meant that most of them were complaining. Most of the Jews under Nehemiah's care were crying out of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. And brethren, if you want to make this more personal, think about the church. This is not the world doing the church wrong. This is church members doing church members wrong. Jews in the same family, the community, everything they've been through together. And this is now how they are being treated by the more influential. For there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters, we are many. So let us get grain, that we may eat and keep alive. Brethren, what point do you think they were at in chapter 5 of Nehemiah verse 2. They what? I mean, they must have been at the point of starvation. And they're bringing this before Nehemiah. And Nehemiah claims his part of it in just a minute. And so they were at a point where they were selling. And again, we say temporary. We are mortgaging our fields. What's the next word? And I love this. If we were singing this, it would be in the vineyard of the Lord. We don't grow vines, we grow vines. We don't mow the yard, we mow the yard. But we'll keep it in the southern vernacular. We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. The grain that they had planted and had to mortgage, they're having to buy their own grain back. And the Persian king put a very heavy tax on it. A famine had hit. And there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and on our vineyards. And now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers. Our children are as their children. Yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of the daughters have already been enslaved. But it is not in our power to help it. Or other men have our fields and our vineyards. They were allowed, and we'll look at Deuteronomy here when we get to it, but temporary leasing your kids out, if you will, was legal. And in the 7th year, or the sabbatical year, if I had taken John's 2 boys and his house, well, it may just be that he could not afford it. And remember, this is not moving around Prairie Grove or Farmington. This was cultural land. This was land that belonged to your family. And so you were allowed to rent your children out, if you will, your wife, yourself, to a Jew. A Jew was not allowed to add tax to whatever he lent you. And we'll look at those scriptures from the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy. And so at the 7th year, you had to give everything back, no matter if they'd paid you or not. You had to give the land back, you had to give the children back. It was a very difficult time. Another part of the problem was, especially in Nehemiah's day, as slaves to their own people, the Israelites, they were being mistreated. You would think if you're going to be good to anyone, I mean, Galatians 6 verse 10, do good unto all men, finish that. Especially double portion to the house of God. And they weren't. They were being mistreated. And so this is a terrible situation they're in. They can't get their children back. And so they mortgaged their fields, their houses, their vineyards, and now they're paying taxes on it. And there's nothing that they can do. The daughters have already been enslaved. They were taken as slaves, sold as slaves. Nehemiah is one of the few Jewish governors that we know. He was appointed as a governor. In other words, he was in charge. And he said, I was very angry when I heard this outcry and these words. And I took counsel with myself. What does it mean, take counsel with yourself? You stop there. You internalize this thing. From God's revelation to him, he was able to put the pieces where they belonged. And he was going to make it right. This is not a friendly seeking service. This was a serious come to Jesus meeting that Nehemiah had with his own people. He said, I took counsel of myself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials, and I said to them, you are exacting interest. That was against the law. Each from his brother, the Jews. And I held a great assembly against them and said to them, we, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations. In other words, what they would do is when they knew that there was someone that was captive to a foreign government that was not obligated by Leviticus nor Deuteronomy, they did their very best to buy them back. How many of you have traveled overseas? Maybe military, maybe. And you hear the gibberish, you don't understand it. Or if you're in Scotland and Ireland, it's a gibberish. There's too much spitting. But then all of a sudden, you hear an American voice. And it is a sweet sound to your ears. One of us. And so they do their best to buy their own back. But you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. Jewish leaders selling back, as like the Gentiles, their enemies, selling back Jews to Jews. That they may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. In other words, they were convicted. John has been right in some of the teaching that he is. We're too interested not in repenting but in justifying. I have a right. The Bible gives me a right. And here they were confronted, they were convicted, and they could not find a word to say. Let's close with this. So I said, the things that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of God to prevent the taunts of the nation of our enemies? I wonder if there's people in Inverness that look at us and say, just look at the way they do each other. You think that is an indictment against us, a conviction? Brethren, if anyone ought to go out of their way, trusting God, and this book closes, or this chapter closes, Lord, and this is the second time in the prayer, don't you forget what I have done. Here was a man who trusted in God to repay him. He had laid up the treasure, and God would repay him. Brethren, any time that you and I do good, God is going to repay us. Sometimes it may be quicker. Sometimes it may be a long ways off. Sometimes we may not even see it, but he blesses us. Let me tell you, Nehemiah is going into this discussion trusting fully in God Almighty to take care of the situation. God helps people that are hurting. Thank you. You know you're going to die, go over and see Jeff.
Well, I decided I might as well just use it. That thing iron has a side. They don't work on somebody else's stuff. Well, you didn't say it, no term. You can go to your own. Like them guys that do this for the drawing, there's so many of them. They don't want to really spit on it. Get down, make sure it's all right. Get you 3 minutes. Now I won't ever see him again. I have to see it. Yeah. It was really funny though. They're all in there. They're up and running and crouching. You know, God makes me feel better. They actually did. That's really good. I don't have to worry. He doesn't cover it. Walk for his happy. What he did is but I was luckily right at bed. Got tipped over a little bit too far. Boy, go down like that. I've always had this somewhat. It's just come and gone, but maybe need some material. So I had to go down to Fort Smith to the store down there and tell them what purchasing for the materials we had. So I went in the bathroom and I locked the door and it's a one stall, you know. So I'm trying to get the clothes out as fast as I can and next thing I know I'm got the pants down to my legs. Somebody knocking on the door and I'm going. Sure, because when I first, I think you keep saying, no, doctor, like I told her, she said, you need to tell the doctor. I said, all right, I'm gonna tell him. What you're gonna do is tell me how to see that pressure. And I did, and then I see my pressure doctor sitting there, patient. What they said is, I need to strengthen my feet. Get better. That's kind of